Hey founders, if you're watching this video, it's because you've yet to launch or you're getting ready to launch. Our goal for this program is to get you to launch and then launch again and again during the course of the program. We also want you to think differently about how you're going to build your MVP and differently about how you're going to perform the launch itself.
So I mentioned MVP, but what does that mean? What does that stand for? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I've been watching a lot of Netflix lately, and I came across this really cool documentary called The Last Dance. And basically, The Last Dance is about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, the dynasty and the domination that team was during that time. And that guy won like 5 MVPs during his career with the Bulls. And Jordan would probably make an awesome entrepreneur. He's got a lot of the characteristics. He's driven, he's focused, he's intentional, he's competitive. But as you guys probably know, we're not talking about most valuable player when we say MVP. And if you're not familiar with startup jargon, what I'm talking about is a minimal viable product. And if you're not familiar with the minimal viable product methodology, I would say maybe you should pause the video right now and go to Amazon immediately and get the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, and read it, and then come back and pick it back up. But I know you're not going to do that. So what I'll do, or at least what I can try to do, is give you the Cliff Notes, abridged version of what that book is about. And basically, it's this. Eric says the traditional model for minimal viable product development is to build, measure, and learn. You see, you quickly push something out into the marketplace that's based on your best guess about what the market wants. You then measure how it performs, and then you iterate based on what you've learned. Now, I hate startup jargon as much as you guys do, but for the sake of efficiency, I'm going to keep using MVP to describe building a simple version of your product or service that people can interact with. And really all it means is building a product efficiently. You see, when you think about building a product, the goal is not to overthink it, but it's to build something ridiculously simple. And to do that, we have to determine what's the absolute minimal functionality we need in order to get this in front of users just to see how they react. And I know it's tempting sometimes to squirrel yourself away in your basement and build the entire vision of your product in one fell swoop, but that's really a terrible idea until we know how others are going to react with what you have built. So we're looking for something you can give to your first set of users in order to see if you can deliver any value, and we go from there. It's that simple. Okay, now that we've defined MVP, let's talk about your pre-launch goals. And let's keep these really, really simple. Step 1 is launch quickly. And we're talking weeks, not months here. And remember, you're going to launch over and over and over again throughout this process. You're going to launch every time you're talking to a new client. You're going to launch every time you do a new function or feature of your service. So just get used to it. Step 2 is get anyone, literally anyone, using your product. Get it in their hands. Get that feedback. And to get that feedback is we need step 3, which is to talk to users. Now, I know this one is hard for some of you because you're more comfortable maybe sitting behind a laptop and banging out code or iterating or casting vision, but it's imperative that as the co-founder or founder of this company, that you're out there, that you're hearing firsthand from potential users. You need to find out as much as you can about the problem from their perspective. How do people in the target market describe their problem? What frustrates them the most about the problem? What have they already tried? What are must-haves that they just can't function effectively without? And, as important, what's not imperative to them? You see, through the interview, you're looking for qualitative data that you just can't get via the quantitative measurements that you're going to get. You're looking for the nuances, how target users feel, what they see as most important. Now, I know it sounds simple to do that, but you'd be surprised at how many founders close up shop before a single user has actually interacted with their product. You see, they get an idea of what they want to build, how they should do it. And then they assume that getting feedback on the initial thing without being fully completed is useless. It reminds me of a CB Insight report that I read, and they essentially did a post-mortem evaluation on over 100 startups and why those 100 startups failed. And 42% of those cases, almost 50%, was because there was no market need for what they were building. Now, I bet they would have figured that out had they been out there in the market and they were talking to these users. But 42%, that was followed by things like not having enough money, not having the right team. But even those things were less of an impact than just simply building something that nobody wants. So you have to talk to your potential users. Of course, your early product is not going to work the way you intend it to. It's not the completed version. The full version is going to take years and thousands, if not more, dollars to build. You probably need to hire a whole team, but you can't afford to wait to build something you've made up in your head alone and then realize later on that nobody wants it. So think about this when you're building your startup. Understand the problem super well and obsess over it, and also obsess over your customer. But don't obsess over the solution yet. Let your customers dictate that. And the last yet very important thing here is to iterate. Iterate or continue to improve your product. Very important. Now be careful not to confuse continuous improvement or iterating with pivoting. And I know that pivoting is like a rite of passage for founders and startups, and maybe you think if you're not pivoting, then maybe you're not doing something right, but we're not talking about that. See, a lot of founders, once they've figured out how to build something, they end up falling in love with it. So if it doesn't work for a certain set of users, they try to figure out who else can it work for. And that's not the goal. And we can use Stitch Crew as an example here as continuous improvement. We build an accelerator, but let's assume that founders are not accelerating through the program. If we make the mistake of falling in love with our programming, we might start thinking things like, well, who else can we accelerate or help with the accelerator? Maybe investors, executives, I don't know, mentors maybe. At that point, we end up losing sight of the problem and our goal. See, our goal is to expedite the launch and scalability process for startups. Our customer is the founder. If our programming is not working, we're not going to get rid of the founders or work on a different problem. We're just going to fix our programming. That's what's broken. The founders are not broken. The problem is going to remain. So we just need to obsess over the problem, and we obsess over our customer, the founders, and our solution can change. When we first started, we built a very lean MVP. And by that, I mean we didn't really have a full blown out program. We didn't have videos like this one that you're listening to. We didn't have a built-in community. We didn't even have corporate perks at that time. Essentially, what we did is we met once a week and we offered space for founders to work in. But over time, we've learned and continued to learn from the founders. We learned what worked, what didn't, and we iterated as needed. And you guys are going to have to do the same. Now, we're going to talk about lean MVPs. We're going to give a couple of classic examples of this. And the mother of all examples when it comes to startups is obviously Facebook. Facebook originally launched as an online directory for a very small group of people, Harvard students, but they iterated. They didn't fall in love with their initial product. They kept improving. And of course, there's Airbnb, which didn't even have payments when it first launched, if you can believe that. And Zappos. Zappos, as an MVP, was a very basic website with a listing of shoes from the local mall. Of course, Zappos was acquired by Amazon, I don't know how many years ago, but so they're doing pretty good. But he didn't even buy inventory at first. That's how lean of an MVP and startup he was. Now, not every industry or startup is going to be a good fit for a lean MVP. Some are geared more towards what we call heavy MVPs. Now, if you're in an industry with significant regulation, like insurance, banking, maybe life sciences, deep tech, or maybe you're a moonshot, maybe you're looking to do space travel, it's going to be a little bit harder to launch because a lot of those areas you're going to have to pass through a bunch of regulatory bodies first. But while it's hard, just remember that your MVP can start with a simple website that explains what you do. And that's helpful when you talk to people and you can interact with people, something they can have to refer back to. So that can be your start. You can build a simple website, and you can do that in a matter of days, not weeks. Okay. So some of you might be thinking, well, what are some hacks to get my MVP going? I know I would be. So I'm going to help you out. We're going to talk a little strategy here on MVP and hacks. The first one being, create a spec list with a defined timeline. Basically a list of stuff you need to build before you launch and then set the deadline. So think about what happens if your goal is to launch in a month, or maybe more specifically in 4 weeks. Then you're going to list only things that can be on that spec, things you can actually build in 4 weeks. You see, this allows you to be selective and will encourage you to prioritize and get rid of any unnecessary features, because you'll have to remove all the features that you just can't build in that specific 4-week timeline. Second, write it all down. This seems really straightforward, but most people just don't do it, and I'm guilty of this myself. But you cannot argue with the science and the research that shows what you write down, you get done. Because it's really easy to change what you're working on before you ever launch it if you never write it down. When you don't write it down, you don't even really realize you're changing. And so your 3-week plan turns into a 3-month plan. So write it down. So at that point, you can be honest with yourself. And see, by writing it down, you can also realize if you've added too many things to your spec, or maybe if you're missing deadlines. You can tell the difference between non-important things, and you can start cutting them down. Because the most important goal here is just to get anything out into the world. Once you get anything out into the world, the momentum to keep anything going, it's going to be strong. If you don't have anything out in the world, it's actually very easy to put it off or delay it for another time. Last, don't fall in love with your MVP. Remember, it's a journey. It's meant to be ever evolving. And on that, I suggest you go check out the documentary The Dance featuring Michael Jordan, or read The Lean Startup, and then I'll talk to you later.